As we continue to watch what's unfolding in Los Angeles, there are questions over whether presidential power overrides state authority. Dr. Karl Kaltenthaler, director of the Morrell Center for Intelligence and Security Studies at the University of Akron, joins me now with some perspective on what's been happening. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question, were ICE protests in LA violent enough to call in the National Guard?
That's always a question of perspective. There's no particular metric that anyone can use to say that this is where you call in the National Guard or this is where you don't call in the National Guard. But traditionally, it's been governors who call in the National Guard. I can only think of one instance, and that was during the Civil Rights era, where the president overrode a governor and called in the National Guard. And so basically what that's doing is nationalizing the National Guard. National Guard is basically a state institution, and the governor really has control over it, except in emergencies. And so President Trump declared an emergency and said that he was nationalizing the California National Guard and calling them in to quell the protests in Los Angeles and some of the other cities in California.
So Governor Newsom now says the president's action is illegal and immoral. Can you explain whether President Trump had the authority to override the governor in calling on the National Guard there?
Well, first of all, I'm not a constitutional expert. I have to say that up front. Having said that, though, I mean, a lot of U.S. law, you have to understand that it's based on precedent, that it's based on a joint understanding of what the law really is. And our joint understanding has been that it's governors who call in the National Guard when there's an emergency in their state. It's really overriding the rights of the governor to say, okay, I'm the president, I'm calling in the National Guard. That would only really seem to be justified, at least according to historical precedent, when the governor is not really upholding the law. And in this case, it's hard to say that Governor Newsom wasn't upholding the law. And that's not really Trump's argument. Trump's argument is that things are so bad in California that he felt it necessary to call in the National Guard. And so what you've got in now is really two narratives going on, two clashing narratives, one that's put out by Trump and one that's put out by Newsom. The narrative by Trump is that the situation in California is spiraling out of control. And the narrative that's put out by Newsom is that the situation in California is essentially under control and doesn't warrant the National Guard being called out.
The Secretary of Defense is talking about using active duty Marines. Is all of this unprecedented to use military against citizens in this way?
So calling out active duty Marines is one step even farther along into murky constitutionality than the president saying, okay, I'm calling out the National Guard over the protests of the sitting governor of California. Yeah, to call out the Marines into the streets of California really brings up the issue of what we call posse comitatus, which is the use of the military in peacetime circumstances. And our constitutional understanding until now has been basically, you don't call out the military in peacetime circumstances. But what President Trump has been arguing and has kept his defense secretary is that what we've got going on in California is akin to an insurrection, which is basically a warfare type situation. This is a definite escalation, not only in policy but also in rhetoric. And a lot of people who I've talked to and who I've been following are saying that, does this then open the way for calling out active duty troops in other circumstances that we haven't really seen in the history of our country before like this?
Right, yeah, it surely seems unprecedented, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Dr. Kaltenthaler, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.